Okay, so this is regarding Lab 4-2. I know some of the students were having some problems understanding how to go through a function that's been created. So I wanted to walk through looking at a function that has already been created, as well as how to create your own functions and to troubleshoot and basically set that up. So the first thing is understanding a created function. So I have made this function here called create data. And you'll see that it has three inputs, x, y, and range. So these are set to defaults, meaning so if I don't tell it to have x be anything, x will be 7, y will be 7, and range will be 100. And I think the easiest way to understand what a function does is to set variables for this. So when a function runs, like we talked about the global versus local scope, x, y, and range only exist when they're inside the function, and they don't exist outside of that. And it makes it kind of difficult and confusing to troubleshoot. And so what I will often do when I'm trying to understand a function is I will go ahead and set the defaults for these, so I can just call these commands and x and y will exist so that I can use them. So let's go ahead and do that. And I will use the default commands here. So range is 100, great. So the first thing we'll do is library raster, and hopefully you all know this by now is uload raster package. And so R is raster nrow x ncol y. So what the heck does this mean? Here's how I would go about finding out. So the first thing I would do is, you can run the command. If you just type it in, we will get some information about it. So in this case, we have a raster layer. It's 7 rows and 7 columns, so nrow and ncol. In this case, it sort of makes sense, but if I were really confused and was like, what the heck is this command, I would type in question mark and then the command, and you'll see so that under raster, it says create a raster layer object. So we know that this command creates a raster. Next, what the heck is the sample range ncel r replace true thing? Okay, so if I type in question mark sample, random samples. Sample takes a sample of the specified size from the elements of x, either using with or without replacement. Okay, so a little bit confusing, but basically we are sampling numbers. So what the heck is range? So if we look here, the first thing we see is x. So x is that first input. X is either a vector or one or more elements from which to choose. Excuse me, that should be 1 to 100. Either a vector or one or more elements from which to choose, or a positive integer. See details. Great. So, and now that I'm reading this, if you scroll down, it says if x has a length of 1, is numeric, and x is greater than 1, sampling will take place from 1 to x. So actually, I didn't even need to do this. So perfect. Now that I have this and I know what sample does, the question is, what is range? Well, range is 100. So, as we set here. So range means it's sampling from, it's pulling samples from 1 to 100. So size is the next thing, and for size, in the arguments it says the number of items to choose. Okay, great. So the number of items to choose is ncel r. So what the heck is ncel r? Let's type it in and find out. It's 49. So this is actually just a number. In this case, it is the number of rows times the number of columns, which is why you end up with 49. Next thing we have is replace equals true. What is that? So should sampling be with replacement? A little bit technical, but the idea is once you choose a number, do you want to allow that number to be chosen again or not? In this case, we do. Okay, great. So now we know what S does. Let's go ahead and run it. And we can take a look at S, and it looks like S is just a list of numbers. Great. So now the next thing we have is T, which is using set values RS. Okay, so what is set values? Set values of a raster object. Assign new values to a raster object. Okay, so we're setting values to R, one presumes, which is this raster we just made, and what's going to go in it is S, or these samples we just drew. Okay, that makes basic sense. So now, if I take a look at T, it looks like we should have values between 1 and 99. Great, so this is a raster, so the obvious way to see what's going on with a raster is to plot it. So let's go ahead and plot T. And you can see is that T is 7 by 7, and it is filled with various values. Great. So now that we know what each individual line does, we can make a guess about what this function is meant to do. Hopefully they're well named. So in this case we have create data. So what this function is designed to do then, it's to create a raster with however many rows and columns you tell it to. Pull some values between 1 and whatever range you tell it to, in this case 100. And then set that up. So basically we're creating a raster of a specified size with random values. So hopefully that makes sense. So when you go to break down a function, I think the best way to do it is to go line by line if you haven't seen it before. If you don't know the command, look up the commands. Try and figure out what every argument in the command is. Sometimes it's obvious, like nrow. We've seen a few times now, so we probably know that stands for number of rows. Sometimes we have no idea what it means in the case of ncell_r, and so we need to look that up, or in the case of set values. And then we can run it. So now that we've done this, we can go ahead and run this code chunk. And one thing I've noticed is that students are expecting a function to do something. So the idea of a function is when you input the function, you just get it ready to do something. In order to actually get something out of a function, you have to call that function. So in this case, let's make a test function, and we are going to call create data. Let's say x equals 9, y equals 13, range equals, I don't know, 40. Great. So now, if we look, we should have a raster, and we do. So it's 9 by 13, and the values happen to be between 1 and 40, so it looks like it just didn't happen to pick any larger. Oh, excuse me, the range was 40, so it picked values up to 40. So now we can go ahead and plot this test file and see that it indeed does what we thought it does. So it just makes a raster with random values.